All right, so we're still on the Kohen blemish thing, which we talked about yesterday. That he prohibited a priest with a permanent blemish to serve in the temple, and that his may be blessed, saying, any one of your offspring through all the generations will have a blemish, shall not approach to offer, meaning to say he shall not approach for service. Anytime one with a blemish serves, he is lashed, and so too is it in the Sifra. A priest with a blemish is not with death, but with a prohibition. Also, that he prohibited a priest with a temporary blemish, such as scurvy or a scab, or that which is similar to them, to serve in the temple so long as he has the blemish. And that is his may be blessed, saying, for any man who has a blemish shall not approach. The language of the Sifra is any one of your offspring, though through all generations will have a blemish. I only know about a permanent blemish. From where do we know the same for a temporary blemish? Hence, we learn to say, for any man who has a blemish shall not approach. The regulations of a permanent and temporary blessing have already been explained in the seventh. No, that must be blemishes, not blessings. Have already been explained in the 7th chapter of Bechorot. It is interesting to wonder if they had some kind of inspection, physical inspection, in order to decide whether there is somebody with a blemish or if it was left to them to self-report. It doesn't talk about the status of the service itself. It just says they get lashes. So for instance, let's say they carried out a service. Is the service successful? They brought a korban or they did something like that. So that would, you'd have to explore that in this whole thing. Okay. That he prohibited the Levites from occupying themselves with any of the service that was designated for the priests. And also the priests from occupying themselves with any service that was designated for the Levites. And that is because there is a designated service in the temple for each one of these families. The prohibition to both of them comes together, not to have them serve with the service of the other. Rather, each group is to do what it was commanded. As he said, each man to his service. The negative commandment that appears about them is his saying to the Levites, but they shall not approach the vessels of the sanctuary and the altar. But afterwards, he went back and spoke to the priests and said, neither they nor you shall die, meaning to say that you, like them, are prohibited. Since just like I prohibited them from doing your service, and that is working with the vessel of the sanctuary and the altar, so too are you prohibited from doing their service. The language of the Sifrei is, they shall not approach the vessels of the sanctuary and the altar. That is the prohibition. From where do we know the punishment? And they shall not die. I only know about the Levites, that they are punished and prohibited from appropriating the service of the priests. From where do we learn the same for priests appropriating the service of the Levites? Hence we learn to say, nor you. And it has happened that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah sought to assist Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada when he, Rabbi Yeshua, said to him, get back, for you are forfeiting your life. For I am one of the gatekeepers, and you are of the singers. Now, this is talking about 2 Levites who themselves had specific responsibilities within the category of Levites. Because amongst the Leviim, there were some who were the gatekeepers, which means they guarded the gates, and there were some who were part of the orchestra or the chorus. And apparently, the Rambam is now saying, even amongst the Leviim, you can't go from one group to the next. Behold, it is being made clear that a Levite who did service in the temple besides his own service is liable for death at the hands of the heavens. So that's even within the Levim. And likewise should priests not occupy themselves with the service of the Levites. However, if they transgress, they're not punished by death. In other words, but rather by lashes. Perhaps even if they touch them, they'd be liable. Hence, we learn to say, but they are only liable for service. They're not liable for touching. In other words, if they, I guess if a Levi touched a vessel, actually touched it, that's not going to make him liable. They'd have to actually do service with that. Or if a gatekeeper, I guess, touched a flute. I don't know. I only know about Levites on account of the service of priests. From where do we know priests on account of the service of Levites? Hence we learn to say, nor you. And there they said, Levites on account of the priests is with death. But priests on account of Levites is only with a negative commandment. See Mishnah Torah, vessels of the sanctuary, and those who serve therein. Parshas B'mei Bar Korach, Mishnah Torah, vessels of the sanctuary, and those who serve therein. 3. So when we had in our Thursday women's Chumash class, we talked about how I was making the observation that it's possible that what got Korach's ire, again, this is my speculation. I'm not, I don't have a source for this yet, but it's possible that what got Korach's ire was that initially it looked like the Leviim were going to actually be the ones to do the service in the Mishkan entirely. In other words, they would be the Kohanim. They would do everything. It seemed like that initially when you read the description, because they're taking over what the Bechor was originally supposed to do. And it seems like the Bechor acted as they brought the sacrifices, it seems like. And it was there every time when Bechor, there are commentaries who talk about this. Would there have been a time when the Bechor actually did the service before the Chet HaEgel? Is it possible that there were times when the Bechor did the service, or even maybe after the Chet HaEgel, until the Mishkan is set up? Is it possible Bechor were doing the service? And it seemed again like they would do the entire service. They would be the Kohanim. And then they get traded with the Levim. And so now the Levim are taking that over. And so I'm speculating that initially it was thought that the Levi would do everything. And then suddenly Aaron is introduced as the Kohen, and then Aaron's family are going to be Kohanim, and suddenly the role of Levim is gutted. And that, and perhaps that's why he has such a strong reaction to Aaron's being put there. It's not just that Aaron gets the job, but the very fact of the job guts what is what was the Levim's responsibilities. And that's why when Moshe says, Rab lechem b'nei Levi, you sons of Levi still have you have a lot. He's perhaps responding to this perhaps outrage over the fact that that all this is being taken away. And now, if you look at the role of the Levim, while they're in the desert, they are moving the Mishkan whenever the Mishkan needs to be moved. And then when the Mishkan is no longer a factor, when you have a Beis Hamikdash, they are guards, and they are the orchestra and the choir, and that's pretty much it. There's not much else they're doing. Even when you think of them as perhaps servants to the Kohanim, they can't even go into those areas. And you see from here, they're not allowed to do the service. They're not. So what? They're not even allowed to go into a lot of the areas where the Kohanim do the service. So it's not like they could be, let's say, carrying the vessels and then the Kohen uses the vessels. Let's say in an area where only Kohanim are allowed to go, Levim are not allowed to even go. So it really does seem like their role became marginalized. That, again, this was what it seemed like when we were learning those sections that dealt specifically with the Levim. And I remember it was quite unclear. You really had to unpack a lot to try to figure out when we were talking about. I remember specifically this came up because there was a story with the Chafetz Chaim. So it's a story of Rav Shimon Schwab when he was with the Chafetz Chaim, and the Chafetz Chaim said, "Do you know why my family are Kohanim and yours are not?" And he said, "The reason my family are Kohanim is because when Moshe called out, 'Who is to Hashem with me?' my family answered the call." So, and then the question on that story was, my question on that story was, that explains the Levim, that it doesn't explain the Kohanim. The reason he's a Kohen is because Hashem chose Aaron to be a Kohen and Aaron's family to continue the line of Kohanim. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with who responded to Moshe at the time of the golden calf. In fact, Aaron, his position is quite precarious when it comes to the issue of the golden calf. So what is the meaning of his story? So there was, since then, every once in a while, some stuff comes up. So I'd gone over this with my nephew, Shua Brown, who is a scholar, who I study with him once a week. And so we had gone over these issues. And there was one thing he found, a contemporary article that he found, where somebody had, it sounded like from that article that what he was suggesting, he wasn't talking about the Chafetz Chaim story, but he was just trying to unpack exactly how this shift happened, or if a shift happened between the Levim and what eventually are the Kohanim. One thing you could say is, it is true that Aaron is chosen, but and that's a separate act, and that's how the Kohanim originate, which was a separate choice of God to choose Aaron. But the reason Aaron is even in the picture is because he's a Levite. In other words, Aaron represents a subset of the Levim. Now, there are times where you see discussions where that point is made. In other words, that while Kohanim are a distinct group, they are also Levim, and they are a subset of Levim. They do descend from Levi. And it could be argued that there couldn't even be Kohanim unless they were from the tribe of Levi, because Levi's the only one who can do the service in the Beis Hamikdash. But what you see from here is that when it comes to service in the Beis Hamikdash, they are considered entirely distinct from each other. The Kohanim in this case are not considered a subset of the Leviim. They're not allowed to do that, because you could argue that all Kohanim are Leviim, only some descendants of Levi are Kohanim. You could say that, and therefore you might wonder, is it possible that Leviim can't do the service of Kohanim, but Kohanim perhaps could do the service of Leviim, because all Kohanim are a subset of Levi. But what you see from here is they are not. They may derive from the tribe of Levi, but now they're considered completely, at least with regard to the service in the Beis Hamikdash, they're considered distinct entities. What is very surprising, and he doesn't spend very much time on this, is that he briefly suggests that even within the Leviim, if you're from a family of gatekeepers, you can't join the choir. And I could imagine that came up, because you would imagine that there were young Leviim who were musically inclined and wanted the opportunity to perform. And it seems like from here that he is suggesting that they would not be allowed to do that, that if you're from a family of gatekeepers, then you're gatekeepers. And if you're a family of from the choir, you're in the choir, which is really, he just briefly just touched on it, but it really is a surprising thing. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit more. The descendants, so this is in the Rambam's codes, chapter 3 of those laws of the Torah vessels, etc. The descendants of Levi were singled out for service in the sanctuary. As it states, at that time, God separated the tribe of Levi. It is a positive commandment for the Levites to be free and prepared for the service of the sanctuary, whether did they desire to do it or not. As it states in Bamidbar 18:23, the Levite shall perform the service of the tent of meeting. When a Levite accepts all the mitzvahs of Levites, with the exception of one matter, he's not accepted unless he accepts them all. Their service was to guard the temple. Among the Levites, there were gatekeepers who would open the gates of the temple and close its doors. And there were singers who would accompany the sacrifices with song each day. The latter concept is derived from exegesis in Deuteronomy 18:7. And he shall serve in the name of God, his Lord, and all his Levites' brethren, which service involves invoking the name of God, I would say, song. When were songs recited? At the time that the wine libations accompanying all the communal burnt offerings and the peace offerings. So communal, when they say accompanying all communal burnt offerings, so they mean the morning offering, that's what we call an ola, or an elevation. They translate it here as burnt offerings, but it's really elevation an ola, an elevation offering. So those are the morning tamid on a regular weekday. So let's say on a typical Sunday morning, you'd have the first offering of the day. That's a communal offering. That's called the tamid of the morning, the continual regular offering. It's brought 365 days a year in the morning. And then there's one in the afternoon. And on a regular weekday, that's all of the communal offerings. Then on a day like today, which is Rosh Chodesh, they have an additional offering, which is called the Musaf. That's also a communal offering. So they'd sing in the morning at daybreak, they'd sing in the afternoon, and those would be the two times that they would be singing. So if somebody was modeling, let's say you had a group that had people that were modeling their lifestyle after the Levites, so that group would sing in the morning and they would sing in the afternoon. And I think they have that. I think they have Lahavdil, Elef Afi Abdels, but I think the Christians, there are monks that do that.
Excuse me, I just have this I thought that there were 2 Talmids during the day, or am I wrong?
You are right. There's one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The first offering.
Okay.
The first offering of the day is the Talmid of the morning, and the second one is called the Talmid Shel Bein Arbaim. So you have one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The one in the morning is the first offering. The one in the afternoon is the last offering of the day, except on Erev Pesach. I think on Erev Pesach, the Korban Pesach comes after that. So on a regular day, those are the only 2 public offerings. What they would, so the Levim would sing in the morning and then in the afternoon. We have Shachris to correspond to that, and we have Mincha to correspond to that. Then on Rosh Chodesh, you have Musaf. So it's one of the distinctions between, let's say, Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, although you have celebration and you have extra inclusions in the prayers and you even say Hallel, but on the rabbinic festivals, you don't have Musaf. You don't have a public offering. Those are only for the biblical holidays. And Rosh Chodesh is one of those. So you'd have, and so they would sing during that as well, because there's an Ola portion of the Musaf. And then on Shabbos, you have a Musaf. And then we consider Korban Pesach to also be a public offering, even though individuals bring it. It has a kind of unique characteristic. So when you read the Mishnayos about Pesach, they sing Hallel while the Korban Pesach is going on. I think that what they sing, I'm not positive about this, but I think what they sing daily at least at the morning Talmud is what we call the Shir Shel Yom, the song of the day, but I'm not positive. I know they do sing that at some point. I'm assuming that they sing that at the morning offering. We don't maybe we do know. That would be an interesting topic to know what else they sang, what other songs they sang. Like, for instance, do they sing the Shir Hamalot, the songs of the steps? Do they, what other songs they sang? Generally, there is a kind of exploration as to what the tunes were. Is there any way to know what the tunes were? I know the Gregorian monks claim to have ancient tunes, which they trace back to the Levites, but I don't know if there's anybody else who's ever found a way to discover what ancient tunes were like of any culture at that time. Be interesting to explore that. Also, but they not only sang, but they played instruments, and we have instrument music reference with regard to King David. He played a stringed instrument for Saul at one point, and also Elisha asked for somebody to come and play music for him before he prophesied. So, but as I know, I mean, I've heard these instruments played, but it's typically sounds like Baroque music or things like that. I mean, I don't know what ancient music might have sounded like. I know in India, I've heard music played that sounds sort of interesting and different on what appear to be primitive instruments from India and other places, but I have no idea if they represent something that people believe is some kind of ancient music. But what's interesting to me here, all right, so that's that so far. So that's public offerings. Also, the peace offering brought on Shavuos. Song was not recited over freewill burnt offerings that the community would bring for the dessert of the altar. So what happens is, if there aren't many offerings that day, just in order so that to sort of honor the altar and make sure it's always burning, there would be there would be animals and reserves that were brought as kind of free will offerings on behalf of the community, but they don't represent commanded offerings. They're being done to just sort of honor the altar and keep it going. So they do not sing during that times. A Levite who's in an acute state of mourning is permitted to perform his service and sing. So even though Kohanim are not, Levites are. There should never be less than 12 Levites standing at the Duchan, which is where they stood. And again, it looks like stands, like stands that you would see like at a basketball game or something like that, where they would sit on it, or like a platform, or either a flat platform or stands, and it would be in the area where anybody, even Israelites, could go in that courtyard area where the altar was. So remember, I mentioned yesterday that there was an area, it's like about 20 something feet from the gate, where even Israelites can go as long as they're pure. So there would be like a platform, and there needs to be at least 12 Levites there each day to recite songs over the sacrifices. Their number could be increased without end. The songs were sung vocally without musical instruments, for the fundamental dimension of the song is vocalizations. Others would stand on the Duchan and play melodies with musical instruments. Some of them were Levites, and some of them were Israelites of distinguished lineage, fit to marry into the priesthood. So singing could only be done by Levites. Musical instruments could even be played by distinguished Israelites, for only a person of distinguished lineage was allowed to ascend the Duchan. The people who play musical instruments are not included in the number of the 12 singers required. So that's also fascinating. You didn't have to be a Levi to play the musical instruments. You had to be a Levi to sing. That's interesting. Okay. What instruments would they play? They played lyres, flutes, harps, trumpets, and a cymbal. There should not be less than 2 lyres, nor more than 6. There should not be less than 2 flutes, nor more than 12. There should not be less than 2 trumpets, nor more than 120. There should not be less than 9 harps, and there's no upper limit. There should be only 1 cymbal. On the days of the festivals and on Rosh Chodeshes, the priests would sound the trumpets while the sacrifice was being offered, and the Levites would recite songs. As it states, on the day of your celebration, on your festivals, or at the beginning of your month, you shall sound the trumpets. Now, I think I remember us listening to the trumpet. I don't know if it was in this class, but they I think it must have been in the Chumash class that we studied about the trumpet. I don't remember, but they have audio, because in the Temple Institute, they've been practicing. So they're ready. They've been Kohanim practicing. So they're ready to do the sacrifices when we get to do sacrifices again. So they have practiced blowing, they have the silver trumpets, and they've been practicing blowing these trumpets. And you can hear the sound that comes out of them, which is it's sort of an interesting kind of trumpet-like sound. But I don't know if I've heard about them practicing to play music on these instruments. It's sort of also interesting to wonder if they would allow any kind of modification of these instruments, or in other words, what do they think is going to happen with those instruments?
Rabbi, when was the shofar brought into the picture as far as music is concerned?
They used both trumpets and shofar.
Mm-hmm.
But here they were just using trumpets, but there were services where they used both trumpets and the shofar, and of course on Rosh Hashanah it's just the shofar. Mm-hmm. So they had them already. In fact, when they would in the desert, they would use trumpets or shofar depending on what message they were sending to the people. But here, it's just the trumpets. Each trumpet was made from a block of silver. If it was made from scraps of silver, it's unacceptable. It had to be, or from other metals, it's unacceptable. The flutes on which they would play would have cane reeds because they produce a sweet sound. The melody would always be played by a single flute because it produces a pleasant sound. 12 days a year, the flute would be sounded before the altar. It's funny, when they describe the Hebrew word they use to describe the playing the flute is to strike the flute. They call it makeh, to strike the flute, which is funny. 12 days a year, the flute would be sounded before the altar. During the slaughter of the Paschal sacrifice, during the second Paschal sacrifice, on the day of Pesach, on the first day of on the first day of Shavuos, and on all 8 days of Sukkot, the sounding of the flute on those occasions supersedes the Sabbath prohibition. Now, this is a rabbinic prohibition.
You know, if there were more than one flute, it would be makas.
There you go. You are the makas expert. Well done. That would be a great interpretation. When it says that this man should be struck, what it means is
hit with a flute.
Yeah. Jean-Pierre Rampal, remember him, the flautist?
Yeah.
I actually went to a concert in Milwaukee. He played along the lakefront, and I once went to hear him play, Jean-Pierre Rampal. So that would be a modern interpretation. And you'd see this man writhing in pain it would have to be somebody who is terrible flautist. And the man would writhe in pain and ask to be whipped. Whip me instead. Whip me instead. Anyways, the sounding of the flute on these occasions supersedes the Sabbath because it is associated with the sacrifice, and the sounding of a flute associated with the sacrifice is an act of temple service that supersedes the Sabbath. A Levite may not enter the temple courtyard. What happened here? Doing just fine.
No, this is from the Rambam. I mean, how does he know?
Yeah, this is the Rambam.
How does he know all this
He is.
stuff?
I mean, he's citing his sources. some of it is text in the Torah, some of it is Talmud, some of it is halachic midrash.
Okay.
He makes the point at the beginning of the codes that that he's distilling what is in the oral tradition, which means we should expect to find in the Talmud. In fact, or at least halachic midrash, and there are commentaries on the Rambam that do that, where they'll cite, even for the things where no source is cited, they will cite the source he's getting it from, with the assumption that it's all there somewhere. Again, he sometimes is writing as law an opinion for which there are other opinions that disagree. In other words, we've seen many times in the Gemara where there's more than one opinion. So, but there is a tradition as to how to resolve those. Eventually, he has to make that decision. For instance, if Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are disagreeing about something, he's not writing that down. He's not saying this is a subject of machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. He'll give the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, because the kind of traditional rule is, if there's an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. Again, every one of those rules is subject to, there's always some exceptions, but they call them klalei hapsak, the rules for coming to a final conclusion about the law. So he is making those decisions, and again, sometimes there are differences of opinion about what the law should be, but he's still deriving it from discussions in the Gemara. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody who wonders where he got this from. Like there's a critical commentary on the codes by the Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David, and every once in a while he'll go, I don't know, where did he get this from? Like, why is he saying this? And then you'll see in the commentaries on the Rambam where they'll say he's getting it from here, he's getting it from there, he's deducing it from this, etc. But yeah, okay. A Levite may not. All right, we're going to stop here, but I want to come back to this, and also, if anybody has info on what ancient music sounded like, I'm interested in that.
Probably it sounds like the music from like Gregorian chanting, timing.
I mean, they claim that, but they are thousands of years after. So the question is, how would they know?
Still doesn't sound very melodic to me.
Right. Yeah. So that's you'd wonder.
Like you said, it's sort of Baroquean.
Yeah.
Pre-Baroquean. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay.